Hello, Salesforce Ohana. Have you ever tried to clone a record inside of Salesforce? Well, it's kind of easy. There is a button for it, but have you actually cloned a record inside of a flow? It's actually a little bit more tricky. And today we're going to be looking at the FlowFest challenge number 5. So the last challenge inside of FlowFestV1, and it involved cloning a record. So we're going to be taking a look at that right after this. If you didn't know, I'm Walters954, 15 times certified developer as of right now. I may have more by the time you're looking at this. And we're going to be taking a look at a FlowFest challenge. If you've never heard of FlowFest, it is a flow building competition hosted by Salesforce Ben and Ohanaly, where tons of people around the world compete to be the Salesforce Flow champion. If you think you got what it takes, go ahead and sign up to compete in the next FlowFest. Or you can actually be a participant, earn prizes, answer quizzes, and learn a little bit about flows. As always, there are links in the description for you to check out how to register for FlowFest or anything that I've talked about today. Challenge number 5 was the final question for FlowFest V1 and the most complicated one in my opinion. Let's take a look at it here. We have S-Force merges with Gene Point and rebands as Gene Force. Create a new account with that name of Gene Force. So we're creating a brand new account and we're going to use the values from S-Force in the new account. So we're going to take the phone, the fax, and the website. Then we need to reparent everything. Well, not everything. It says all the related records, but it really only cares about contacts and opportunities from Gene Point and S-Force. We're going to need to look for the contacts and the opportunities that are related to the original records and then reparent them to the new GeneForce account that has been created. Finally, we want to calculate the average amount of the closed won opportunities. Somebody just threw that one in there just to make it a little bit harder. As always, before we start jumping in and building our flow out, let's make sure that we understand the problem correctly. To do so, we're going to search for those accounts. S-Force, we have it in here. We're going to be searching for this account and taking information from the phone, fax, and website and creating a new account for that. And there is also Gene Point. I'll need to get the spelling correct. There's a new account called Gene Point. We're not taking any of this information, but we do want the related contacts and opportunities, specifically the closed won opportunities, because we need to then calculate that average. If you don't know the average, it is just the total divided by the number. So we're going to add up all of those and then do some division for it. Moving on to the setup, let's go ahead and create our new flow. As always, I won't say as always, but this will be an auto launch flow. It could have been a screen flow, and I think in some of the later FlowFests, we do have screen flow types of challenges to deal with. But in this instance, we are going to create an auto launched flow. The first thing we need to do is get our S-Force account. Get record. Trying to spell these right, so I don't mix up anything. We need to get the S-Force account. Normally you wouldn't want to be getting something by a specific name, but in this instance for the competition, it makes sense to get things by the name. I'm going to copy this because we also need to get GeneForce. Or did I say GeneForce? I meant Gene Point. That's the combination that's happening here. So we're combining those two together. Now that we are combining those two or getting those two values, we need to, this is where some of the magic comes in. We need to create another record. There's a few different ways that we could do this so that it actually clones the record successfully. We want information from S-Force and we want, let me rename this. We want information from Gene Point. Do a little delete there and then tab back and you'll be able to get it. Now I am going to do an assignment. So this is where we're going to start creating our new account that we have. I'm going to call this assign account, and I'll say Gene Point. And this is where some of the magic starts to happen. We could pretty easily just create a new account and add in the fields that we're looking for, but I want this to be a true clone. I don't just want the website and the facts and just copy those values over. I want everything to come through. To do this, we need to create a resource. I'm going to call this var account Gene Point. I feel like I'm mixing up the name. It's Gene Force, right? That's what they said it was. So var account Gene Force. It's going to be a record type, the account in there, and I'm going to actually set this equal to our S-Force, the entirety of S-Force. In our get record, we got S-Force here. Now I'm setting our variable to S-Force. And the next thing I want to do, because now it has just copied that value into there, to make this able to be inserted or cloned as a new value, we need to clear out the ID, because the ID defines if you can insert or basically create something or update it. If it has an ID, it should be updated. If it doesn't have an ID, then it needs to be inserted first. What I'm going to do is select the ID variable and set it to null. Set it to empty, an empty string, so that I can now insert our Gene Force account. If we remember from the prompt, we also need to change the name, Gene Force and name. And we are calling this Gene Force, right? And so there's a lot going on here. So before I even start going through the rest of it and updating the accounts or anything like that, let's see if it actually works. Call this account clone Gene Point, and this is auto launched. Make sure to have good naming so you remember for the future, just so you can get an idea of it. We're going to run this in rollback because if we run it truly, we can probably only do this once, maybe twice. Well, the child records are going to change. Taking a look here, we're able to find an S-Force account, and we are able to find a Gene Point account. We are setting our Gene Force. We're getting some weird results in here, but we are setting the ID to blank, and we're setting the account to none. So let's check out if this is just an error that we're looking, or sorry, just a visual bug that we're looking at, or if the value is not being updated altogether. What I'm going to do next is create a record, create an account, because that value should be in there. Call this Gene Force. Really mixing that one up today. And I'm going to update our Gene Force variable that we have created. Save this, go for the debug one more time, make sure it's in rollback, run it, and let's see down here what we have. And it looks like it's working properly, even though the value is being set, and this doesn't look like it has anything in it. Look over here inside of our variable. We have a ton of stuff automatically coming through. Some fields that were set by our S-Force record, something like the phone, we should be seeing this phone number in here. I think that ended in 7,000, right? So our phone number is being set. We're cloning the record, and we have no error in here because there's no ID. One more time, just to illustrate this a bit more, let me delete this out, right? So what I did there is I deleted the line that removed the ID. And when we try to do our creation, we should get a big nasty error. We didn't get a big nasty error. Huh. we have an ID in here, but we did not get a big nasty error. I'm gonna run this. I'm gonna keep it in here because I assumed we had to remove the ID, but let's see what happens. That might mess me up from how I'm thinking about this. We'll run it once without the ID, or sorry, with the assignment, removing the ID, and then we'll run it a couple other times, taking this out. So once again, GeneForce ID. I've never tried that before, so let's put this back in here. Empty. Boom. And this is how it's normally supposed to be. You can't update something with an ID. Maybe Salesforce is just automatically taking care of some things that I didn't know of. They're always updating flows and making them better. Okay, so now that we have our GeneForce account getting created, we need to do the rest of the steps inside of our flow, right? So, or from the prompt, we need to take all of the accounts, or all of the contacts and all of the opportunities. We need to change them to the new account that got created. There's a couple ways to do this, but the fastest way, and at least in terms of FlowFest, you want to be as fast as possible. But one way is to just update all of the records that meet the criteria of the old accounts. So you want to look for any contacts that have the account ID equal to Salesforce. So that specific account, we're grabbing those, or the account ID that's equal to I hope it's GenePoint, because it's GeneForce is the combined one. Whoever did the naming on this, I gotta talk with you. You know that I specifically said or, not an and condition, because you cannot have more than one ID. There's only one ID on the account. You can't have an ID of 1, 2, 3 and an ID of 4, 5, and 6. There's only one specific ID in terms of the accounts for contacts. This means when we do or, it's going to get two separate values. It's going to get the ones for GeneForce and it's one, or GenePoint, and the one for Salesforce. I'm just going to call them Gene and Salesforce because I remember Salesforce. And now we need to do the reparenting, right? The account ID of both of those sets need to change to our new GeneForce ID. There we have it. We're now, even though we got them from this query using the account ID, we're changing the account ID. Same thing for the opportunities. And all of this is probably going to just go away. It did. But same thing, we're going to do it based on account ID. Account ID equals Salesforce ID and equals GenePoint ID. And we're going to set the account ID. So now this is the reparenting element of it. We're going to put this to GeneForce ID since we created that new variable for it. Excellent. Now, a couple things need to happen because we need things to do our counting and we need to find our average, right? But this will do our reparenting. We've solved that specific piece, but now we need to sum up all of the individual one opportunities for the amounts and then get the average of it. There's not a really good way of doing summations or average, those types of arithmetic inside of flows. You do have to do loops, and there's nothing else you can do about it. So to do so, first we need to get the values we are looking for. Get records. We're going to call this get ops, and these are only the one opportunities. Going to get those one opportunities. The criteria is the account ID needs to equal our GenePoint point ID. And it also said that the status is 1. But if you notice there, I skipped to it a little bit. So you can do status as 1, or sorry, stage name equals 1. If you have multiple stage names, stages that are categorized as 1, when you're building out opportunity stage names, you could call negotiation 1. If that's true, then you would have to do a way more complex condition. Instead, what is better to do is use the is1 field. It's a background field that lives on the opportunity, and we want to set this to true. So anything that is a 1 classifies as a 1 opportunity will get selected as well. We then want all of the records to come through. Now, we need to loop over all of our 1 opportunities. Let's create a loop. We're touching on a lot of stuff. Select our collection. So these are our 1 opportunities. We can start from the first one, which is fine. And we need to do an assignment or a couple of assignments to get our average. Assign some values. To get our average, we need 2 pieces of it. One is the value that we are summing up, or the numerator and the denominator. So the numerator will be the sum of all of our amounts. Right now there's nothing that can hold the sum of our amounts. So we need to create a variable, var op amounts. To be even more specific, these are the 1 amounts. Take a currency field, 2 decimal places, and we want to start out at 0. So now we have something that can hold our opportunity amounts in it. Instead of setting it equal to, we want to add to it every time our loop variable, the amounts of our loop variable. We're going to keep adding up until the loop finishes. The next thing we need to do is the denominator, right? We need to understand, hey, this is how much we are dividing it by. Once again, there's 2 ways of going about this. We could have done an equals count, or we can do a counter. So however many times we iterate through the loop, that's our counter, and that's what we're going to be taking. Similar thing, I may do it in multiple ways. Count op1 count. This is going to be a number, no decimal places, and starting at 0. We then need to add 1 to that. So continue to add it up. Once that all finishes, we then need to just shove out our values, right? Like this is it. We're pretty much done calculating our average. Let's jump down, and for FlowFest, of course, you're going to be submitting it onto the FlowFest submission variables. For this, we do not have that, so let's just update our account. We are going to select the, trying to think of the best way to do this. Let's just do it this way. We're going to select our account with the ID of Gene Force. And the fields we want to set, let's set maybe I think there's an annual revenue. So we'll set our average opportunity 1 amount to the annual revenue. To do this, it's not just a matter of setting our currency field. Like this is the formula that we need to do. Var op1 count. That will not work because this is not a formula. It will not execute properly. So I'm going to actually take that, add a new resource, come down to formulas. I like to call my formulas form op1 average, AVG, and dump in that formula there. we are taking our opportunity one amount, dividing it by the number of opportunities, and we are returning that in a currency field. Boom, we are done there. Let's also shove in, let's not shove in anything yet. Let's take a look at what actually gets generated from this, because I've built a lot. I don't know if it actually works. Let's run this. Looks like it ran all the way through, but our loop is not executing. Why is that? Why is that? It's not finding any loop values. We failed to find any gene point values in here. Let's see. Opportunity. So something we have off with our opportunity count. Find these, Gene Force ID. This should be the new ID that we have created. Let's also rename this because we have forgot to rename it. Perfect. And this is saying that, you know, no changes will take effect until we redo everything. Take a look here. Find all the opportunities where the IDs equal this or the ID equals that, and reparent it to this. Yes, here, look at this. Look at this. Am I silly? Some of you probably caught this and were like, oh, come on, man. It looks like this here. Looks like in here, right? This is not the correct. We need Gene Force ID. This is why you always debug before you try things out. All right, we have saved this. Let's debug again. And now we can see that we are looping a couple times. In our loop iterations, there's 1, 2, 3 loop iterations, and then we are updating something with 57K worth of the annual revenue, which is awesome. And really quickly jumping through all of this, right? The whole thing. Getting our records. These are fine. We're doing the assignment. This looks blank, but it's a visual bug, I'll say, because we are actually setting the value inside of there. Here is what is actually being set. Literally everything inside of our, this is the create record. So it's cloning the value there. We are then updating our records, our accounts, and our opportunities, getting our 1 opportunities, and then looping over them, counting up, so then we can finally end on this average, the average formula that gets generated. We can see in the assignment that the value, even though it's adding up every time. Got 1 and 2. Is that it? I don't know if that's it, but that's all we got right now. We're yielding the correct value in here. Lastly, I think, just in making this harder, somebody said, let's count the number of, I think, employees. I got to remember. Let me check the FlowFest sheet here. So it says, count the number of contacts under Gene Force. We've done this before, and we'll do this to kind of trip things up as well. Instead of doing it inside of our loop, we will do it inside of an outside of it, inside of a assignment value. Assign contact count. Very similarly, we need to create a variable, contact count, set it to a number. Just going to put zeros for right now, even though it doesn't matter. Equals count, and we can't have decimal place for a number of contacts. We want to count the Oh, our contacts. We cannot count our contacts without having a value in here, because we've updated these values, but we don't have the values that we're looking for. So we have to do an extra get, which is a little bit annoying, but if you were doing a loop, it would be even more costly. gene point. And then after this, we'll run the whole thing and wrap it up because I know this one is running for a little bit. The account ID equals gene force. Let's get that right. And that's it. We just want to get all of the records, make it a collection. Now we can jump back in here and see our collection values for get gene point contacts. Bada bing, bada boom. We can also do the same thing here, right? We did the opportunity count. We can do an equals count here since there's an assignment outside of it for our 1 opportunities, and we would need to remove it from here because we don't need to add to it every time. Either way works. If you have an assignment before your get or you want to do it in looping, pretty much the same thing. Let's run this. Let's run this fully now and take a look at a couple things. The assignment, we've got 3 contacts and 2 1 opportunities, and our account should be created. If we jump in, let's search it. Gene force. Look at that. Our brand new record, not just the phone fields, but everything that it had filled out is in here. Anything that is on the record, and that is how you effectively clone with inside of a flow, right? You can assign the value to it, remove the ID, and create the new value. Just for giggles, let's do one last thing inside of our assignment. I'm going to remove this account ID, this deletion line, and setting it to null. And let's see what happens. Save this, debug again, run it fully, and that ran. That is very surprising. That is very surprising, but it works out nonetheless. I'm going to the new record. This should be the new record. Gene force created. Yeah, that's the right time. That is very interesting. I think in the past you've needed to remove the ID, but regardless, it still works. So you can use this process to clone records, and you've completed the FlowFest challenge, which is great. All right, we were able to successfully clone a record inside of Salesforce Flows. Thank you to FlowFest for such an interesting challenge and really letting us kind of stretch our flow muscles a little bit in something that a lot of people haven't seen before. If you aren't registered for the upcoming FlowFest, links in the description for that. Definitely check it out. Anybody is welcome, participants or spectators or competitors, right? I will also be a part of FlowFest and be running some of the behind the scenes for it. As always, I'm Walters954. If you like this video, make sure to leave it a like and a thumbs up. And if flows are kind of interesting to you, but you've reached that peak, or you want to know some of the behind the scenes on how to make these things even more efficient, I have a development course out right now, the fundamentals of Apex, which you can check out to really start to go beyond some of the limits of flows and start to move into the developer realm and start your development journey. As always, I'm Walters954, and remember, I believe in you.